Welcome back, folks. We're living in a time where up is down, men are women, and the mainstream media can't keep their pronouns or their credibility straight. America's in the middle of a cultural identity crisis, and the left is driving the clown car straight into oncoming traffic, honking about tolerance while serving into every absurd contradiction imaginable. Today's clips are a masterclass in progressive performance art, where feelings trump facts, biology is optional, and even Anderson Cooper can't keep up with the script. He was just caught on camera misgendering a civil rights attorney on national television. So much for allyship, huh? The truth is, these people aren't serious. And every time they shove another activist scold in front of a camera, they hand the right a campaign ad on a silver platter. So buckle up. We're diving into the intellectual black hole where identity politics eats its own.
We're back with Senator Bernie Sanders. I want to introduce Grace Thomas. She's a local civil rights attorney. She's a Democrat. Grace?
They, them pronouns, actually. Thank you.
Oh.
Good evening, Senator Sanders. Polling and turnout data indicate that men of all racial demographics are turning away from the Democratic Party.
What you just watched was peak 2025 progressive theater, where the script matters more than the substance, and even the stars forget their lines. Anderson Cooper, the left's silver-haired mouthpiece for serious journalism, just misgendered a civil rights attorney on live TV. And the second it happened, you could practically hear the pronoun police suiting up, sirens blaring, fingers poised for outrage. Now, Cooper introduces a civil rights attorney, presumably to discuss civil rights, and within seconds, the conversation swerves into a grammar correction over third-person plural pronouns for a single person. And just like that, we go from policy to feelings, from substance to semantics, because in the religion of woke, the gravest sin isn't lying to the American people, it's misusing a word. Not voter disenfranchisement, not crime, not the migrant crisis, a botched pronoun. And that rhetorical pivot isn't accidental, it's deflection. Faced with the hard truth that minority voters are leaving the Democrat Party, the left hides behind identity signaling. It's the political version of shouting squirrel while the house burns down. And the media plays along because it's safer to obsess over language that admit that working class Americans feel abandoned. This also exposes the absurd fragility of their ideology. If even Anderson Cooper can't keep up with the ever-mutating rule book, what chance does the average voter have? The left keeps shifting the standards, then punishes anyone who doesn't keep up. That's not inclusion, it's a loyalty test. And loyalty tests don't win elections, they repel everyone who doesn't have a PhD in progressive jargon. And here's a real kicker. After that self-important correction, this activist casually mentions the actual story, saying, polling and turnout data indicate that 9 of all racial demographics are turning away from the Democrat Party. That's the point, but it's buried under the rubble of performative outrage. It's like hosting a fire safety seminar and starting by lighting a match. And the data backs it all up. According to Pew Research, Edison Research exit polls, and CNN's own voter analysis, Hispanic men shifted from supporting Biden by 28 points in 2020 to only 8 points in 24. A 20-point collapse. Black men under 50 have moved from supporting Democrats by over 80% in 2020 to just over 60% in 24, with many citing crime, inflation, and feeling talked down to by the party. Asian American support for Democrats declined by over 15 points during the same period, especially in urban areas where soft on crime policies have had direct impact. Even Middle Eastern and North African men, often lumped into white categories by Democrats, are expressing growing discontent with progressive overreach and identity politics. These shifts aren't anomalies, they're a trend. Working class men of every background are watching the left obsess over pronouns and performative outrage while their actual lives get worse. And that's why men are leaving. They're not interested in being shamed for talking like normal human beings, using linguistic conventions as old as time. They're watching political discourse become a minefield where one wrong syllable makes you a villain. Try selling that to a guy who's worried about gas prices, crime, and raising a family. If you want to stop hemorrhaging support from men, maybe stop doing the exact thing that's pushing them away. And the pronoun obsession isn't just annoying, it's literal political self-destruction. Every time a national broadcast elevates some elite academic word game over real issues, it proves how unserious the left is. People are struggling, and the left is arguing about grammar. They're not persuading anyone. They're writing Republican ads in real time. This they-them charade isn't about respect or inclusion. It's clearly a rhetorical weapon, a constantly moving target meant to confuse, control, and trap you in a permanent state of apology. The rules change on a whim so they can always cry victim and demand compliance. science. It's not about communication, it's about submission. We don't let people rewrite math based on feelings, and we shouldn't let them hijack language to suit their personal fetishes, delusions, or manipulative social agendas. The only way out is to return to shared universal rules, language rooted in reality. All that being said, keep doing it. Keep putting the pronoun patrol on TV. Keep throwing tantrums over syllables while the country deals with real problems. Because America is watching, and we're done playing pretend. We're also done paying taxes, but apparently Democrats have a problem with that.
The Speaker is rushing to the floor to pass a budget reconciliation to screw America by passing the biggest tax cut in history on the backs of the American people? WTF? Who's in charge?
When a Democrat starts shouting about screwing America, you can bet they're either lying, projecting, or both. According to Representative Stephen Horsford, Republicans are apparently plotting to destroy the country by cutting taxes. Not launching wars, not printing trillions in inflation-driving stimulus like Biden, not flooding the system with unvetted immigrants like Biden, but letting Americans keep more of their own money. Oh no, the horror. Now, rhetorically, Horsford opens with a classic straw man. He says, the Speaker is rushing to the floor to pass the biggest tax cut in history, as if this is a shady backdoor operation no one saw coming. In reality, this is the exact opposite of what's happening. The vote was postponed because of Republican infighting, not some shadowy plot to sneak legislation past the American people. Speaker Johnson had to delay the vote because conservatives demanded more spending cuts to match the tax relief. A fact Horsford conveniently ignores because it doesn't fit the evil Republicans narrative. Next, there's the emotional bait and switch. Horsford calls it a tax cut on the backs of the American people. Let's be clear, tax cuts can't come on the backs of anyone. They come from reducing how much the government confiscates from the people in the first place. That's not theft. That's returning stolen goods. The only backs being leaned on here are the bureaucrats and lobbyists who rely on Washington's bloated budget to stay bloated themselves. As for this being the biggest tax cut in history, that's more political theater. The current GOP proposal builds on the 2017 Trump tax cuts, which, according to the Tax Foundation and Congressional Budget Office, boosted GDP growth, raised wages, and lowered unemployment prior to COVID. They're not reckless giveaways. They're growth mechanisms. The GOP's proposed budget includes expanded cuts to tipped wages, Social Security income, and small business taxes. Exactly the kind of relief that helps middle-class and working Americans. But Democrats like Horsford need you to believe it's all about yachts and caviar. It's not. It's helping people like you and me. Then there's the economic illiteracy baked into Horsford's meltdown. He calls the tax plan fiscally irresponsible while ignoring that the same bill includes over $2 trillion in spending cuts. Meanwhile, Democrats who voted for $6 trillion in stimulus in just 2 years want to lecture anyone about debt? Please. That's like a shoplifter accusing the cashier of stealing. And let's not forget, Democrats are perfectly fine borrowing more as long as it funds their pet projects. Suddenly, when Republicans want to pair tax cuts with actual budget restraint, it's a crisis. And let's not gloss over the real reason this bill has Democrats panicking. It's effective. Trump's big, beautiful bill is a political win, and they know it. It forces Democrats to argue against letting waiters, nurses, and retirees keep more of what they earn. It puts them in the absurd position of screaming that cutting taxes is oppression while most Americans are just trying to fill up their tanks and keep the lights on. Finally, let's talk about projection, shall we? Horsford accuses Republicans of screwing America, but who actually did that? Who locked down schools for years, wrecked small businesses, weaponized the IRS, and set fire to border security? Who presided over record inflation while pretending it was transitory? Who's pushing DEI over defense, pronouns over policing, and gender studies in Pakistan over veterans at home? That wasn't Speaker Mike Johnson. That was you and your party, Stephen. So no, this isn't some villainous scheme to screw America. It's the beginning of a course correction, one where taxes go down, spending gets reined in, and the American people get treated like adults again, not piggy banks for a government that's forgotten its limits. Democrats can scream all they want, but the louder they get, the more obvious it becomes who's actually terrified of losing control. And speaking of being terrified of losing control, Congress is at this moment debating voter ID, and Democrats are not happy at all. I wonder why.
In Georgia, over half of the population doesn't have a passport, and our driver's licenses, even the real ID, doesn't prove citizenship. This bill could force Georgians to pay more than $700 million just to register to vote. Y'all, that's a poll tax, plain and simple. and it's blatant voter suppression. Voter
Gentlewoman's time has
suppression by
expired.
any other name.
Let's take a moment to appreciate just how serious this has all gotten. According to Representative Nikema Williams, asking someone to prove they're a citizen before voting in a U.S. election is now a poll tax. Yes, apparently the real threat to democracy isn't foreign interference, ballot harvesting, or fraudulent registrations. It's asking someone to show a passport or a birth certificate. We've officially reached the point where basic eligibility standards are framed as oppression. First, let's talk about the rhetorical sleight of hand at play here. Williams invokes the term poll tax, a loaded phrase tied to Jim Crow-era voter suppression, knowing full well it triggers emotional reactions and historical trauma. This is a textbook example of a moral equivalence. A fallacy where you equate two wildly different things to score points. Requiring proof of citizenship, which applies equally to all races, is not the same as racist policies that were designed to disenfranchise black Americans. It's not even the same universe. It's like comparing airport security to apartheid. Then there's the flat-out misinformation. Williams claims the bill could cost Georgians $700 million just to register to vote. Really? Where's that number coming from? A study? An economic report? Or was it scribbled on the back of a cocktail napkin at a DNC fundraiser? The bill allows for multiple forms of documentation: real ID compliant driver's licenses, U.S. passports, military IDs, or a government issued ID paired with a birth certificate or hospital record. Most Americans already have these documents. This isn't an expensive burden. It's standard paperwork. You need more documentation to open a bank account or adopt a puppy than Democrats want you to show to vote in a federal election. Williams also says in Georgia, over half the population doesn't have a passport. Great, because the bill doesn't require one. It's one of several options. You don't need a passport to vote. You just need to prove you're a citizen. The horror. Next, she throws in the red herring about name changes, saying this will especially burden married women. Except Representative Chip Roy already addressed this on the House floor and in committee hearings. The bill includes clear exemptions and flexibility for name updates, and even Representative Mary Miller, who co-sponsored the bill, cited it as a scare tactic. This is less about concern for married women and more about inventing imaginary victims to manufacture outrage. And let's also note the glaring contradiction at play here. Democrats scream that election denial is a threat to democracy, but simultaneously insist that verifying citizenship is somehow dangerous. So which is it? Is election integrity sacred, or do we just hand out ballots like Halloween candy and hope for the best? So you're telling me that the same party that demands 87,000 new IRS agents to track Venmo payments over $600 is now saying verifying voter eligibility is too burdensome? Give us a break. And then there's the most ridiculous part of it all, this idea that verifying citizenship is somehow anti-democratic. Let's be clear, only citizens are allowed to vote in federal elections. That's not new, that's not controversial. That's federal law. All the SAVE Act does is ensure the law is actually enforced. You'd think the people constantly chanting protect democracy would want to protect the integrity of voting, but no, they want to protect the illusion of accessibility, even if it means diluting the votes of legal citizens with non-citizen participation. Because yes, that does happen. In Texas alone, Governor Greg Abbott announced the removal of 6,500 non-citizens from voter rolls, including nearly 2,000 who had voting history. In fact, even while he was in Wisconsin, Elon Musk and Antonio Gracias both exposed how there were potentially hundreds of thousands across the country of non-citizens who had not only been registered to vote, but had potentially voted in previous elections. So let's stop pretending this is about voter rights. It's about control. The left wants an electoral system built on loopholes, vagueness, and zero accountability, because that's what keeps their machine running. But the American people are waking up. They don't want a system built on vibes. They want laws, ID, proof, not to suppress voters, but to protect their vote. And that's what terrifies people like Nikema Williams, because once you strip away the emotional manipulation and the fake numbers, all you're left with is the uncomfortable truth. Citizenship should matter. And if that's controversial, then maybe the problem isn't the bill, it's the people opposing it.
I rise in strong opposition to the so-called SAVE Act, a bill that is a modern-day poll tax targeting American women and low-income Americans. This bill bans voter ID. It bans using driver's licenses as voter ID unless they're backed by additional proof of citizenship, a requirement that excludes nearly all driver's licenses and real IDs issued today. Now, for women who have changed their names, often through marriage, this means showing a passport or a birth certificate that may not match their legal name. That would have meant that my grandmother, who had long since lost her birth certificate, would have been ineligible to vote under this bill. In California alone, that would include more than 7 million women. Now, this would force those women to pay $130 just to get a passport they need to vote. With nearly a third of Californians lacking passports, this bill would cost them more than $1.25 billion statewide. If you have to pay to vote, that's called a poll tax, plain and simple. It is also unnecessary red tape for people just trying to cast a ballot. This is a bill in search of a problem. We have enough trouble getting American citizens to vote.
California Representative Laura Friedman's unhinged speech against the SAVE Act is a masterclass in melodrama, misinformation, and weaponized victimhood. According to Friedman, requiring proof of U.S. citizenship to vote is not just controversial, it's a modern-day poll tax. That's right. In her world, confirming you're a citizen before voting in a federal election is the new Jim Crow. When Democrats start yelling poll tax, you know they've run out of real arguments and are now rummaging through the historical trauma junk drawer for cheap political points. Now let's start with our biggest whopper. This bill bans voter ID. No, it doesn't. It requires voter ID to be backed by proof of citizenship when registering to vote. There's a difference between banning a thing and requiring it to meet a basic standard. That's like saying TSA bans boarding passes because they also ask for ID at the gate. The goal here isn't to make voting harder, it's to make cheating harder. If your driver's license doesn't prove citizenship, you'll need to back it up with a birth certificate or passport. That's not suppression, that's common sense. Now, cue the sob story about name changes. Friedman claims the bill targets married women who may have changed their name and no longer have matching documentation. Let's do some basic logic here. If your legal name has changed, you're required to update your voter registration anyway, under existing law. And this bill doesn't prevent name updates. It just ensures your proof of citizenship matches the name you used to vote. If your documents don't match, that's not disenfranchisement, that's called administration. You know the thing that keeps elections from turning into free-for-alls? Next, she trots out the ghost of her grandmother and the emotional blackmail that follows. Sorry, but anecdotal appeals to long-dead relatives don't override basic election security. Then she drops her next favorite scare stat. She says, in California alone, that would include more than 7 million women. That's pure speculation wrapped in a big, shiny lie. The bill doesn't exclude anyone from voting. It requires verification. If 7 million women don't have the necessary documentation, the problem is with the California DMV and ID system, not the SAVE Act. And let's not forget, most people who don't have passports or birth certificates readily available do have access to them. It's not like these documents were tossed in a volcano. You need them for jobs, for school, for Social Security, for Medicare, for travel, but apparently for voting, the bedrock of citizenship, we're supposed to pretend none of that matters. And here's the real cherry on top. She says, if you have to pay to vote, that's a poll tax. Wrong. A poll tax is a required fee to cast a ballot. The SAVE Act requires proof of citizenship, not payment to vote. There is no fee to vote. If you don't have documentation, yes, you may need to obtain it the same way you would if you applied for any government service, benefit, or legal process. We don't call it a poll tax when someone has to buy gas to drive to a polling station or take time off work. This is just lazy rhetoric designed to inflame, not inform. And let's be real, this solution in search of a problem argument completely falls apart when you look at California, her state, my state, where our state's motor voter system has accidentally registered non-citizens multiple times, including admitted incidents in 2018 that the DMV blamed on administrative errors, at which time nearly 1,500 non-citizens were registered to vote, and some of them did cast ballots. Even if the number were small, shouldn't we be proactive instead of reactive, especially in a state that mails ballots to every registered voter by default? Isn't that what Democrats claim that they want when it comes to election integrity, preventing problems before they spiral out of control? Or does that only apply when it's politically convenient to their agenda and party? At the end of the day, Democrats are clearly not about protecting voters. They're about protecting a system riddled with ambiguity and loopholes. They know full well that requiring proof of citizenship is popular with the American people. That's why they have to smear it with dramatic comparisons to segregation-era policies and conjure up billion-dollar imaginary burdens. But here's the truth. You need ID to buy cold medicine, rent a car, or pick up a package at UPS. But somehow asking for proof that you're a citizen to help choose the leader of the free world is a bridge too far. No, what it really is panic. Because when Democrats can't rely on confusion, lax oversight, and ghost voters, they start to lose their grip on the machine. The SAVE Act doesn't disenfranchise anyone. It protects every legal citizen voter. If that terrifies Representative Friedman and her friends, maybe they should be asking why. But I think it's very clear to anybody with half a brain. And speaking of Democrat meltdown, here we have Chuck Schumer doing what Democrats love to do, melting down.
Senator, what's your opinion of the violence against Tesla, their products? What are your thoughts on that? Do you denounce the violence against Tesla products and dealerships and cars in the streets?
I can't talk about Tesla, but Elon Musk is a disaster for America, and America knows it. Look at Wisconsin.
Ah, yes, another proud moment of moral clarity for Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer refusing to denounce violence because it's politically inconvenient. Asked point blank if he condemns the attacks on Tesla dealerships and products, his response wasn't just evasive, it was revealing. He dodged the question entirely, then pivoted to hurling a personal insult at Elon Musk, calling him a disaster for America, as if that somehow justifies people smashing up cars and vandalizing businesses. This isn't leadership, it's cowardice in a suit. Now let's break this down. First, Schumer employs a classic non sequitur. He's asked about physical violence and responds with a personal opinion about a businessman. That's not an answer, it's rhetorical misfire. It's also a red herring, deliberately dragging attention away from the issue of political violence to make it about a personality he dislikes. That's not just intellectually lazy, it's dangerous, because what he's doing is normalizing violence as long as it's directed at a target he approves of. Now let's talk about what Schumer didn't say, because silence in this context is consent. Imagine the reaction if Republican lawmakers refused to denounce mobs attacking Planned Parenthood clinics, or if a conservative senator dodged a question about violence at a black-owned business by saying, well, that guy's a disaster for America. The media would combust, but Schumer gets a pass because the victim is Elon Musk, a man who dared to buy Twitter, question left-wing orthodoxy, start Doge, and basically expose all of their pet projects and succeed at all of it without kissing the ring of political gatekeepers. Obviously, this isn't about Tesla, it's about precedent. When the highest-ranking Democrat in the Senate refuses to condemn violence against private citizens and property because he dislikes the person associated with them, it sends a message. It says, we're okay with violence as long as it's politically aligned. That's not democracy, that's thug politics. And it's not new. From the summer of 2020, when Democrat mayors and governors let their cities burn under the euphemism of mostly peaceful protests, to the present, where silence equals permission. The pattern is crystal clear at this point. The Democrat Party is the party of sanctioned rage. If the mob agrees with them, it gets a wink and a nod. If it doesn't, it gets indicted. And let's not gloss over the broader hypocrisy here. Democrats constantly warn about threats to democracy, yet they remain stone cold silent, or worse, openly supportive when political violence comes from their own side. They screamed about January 6th for years, but didn't blink when Antifa torched courthouses, when BLM mobs looted neighborhoods, or when leftist activists showed up at judges' homes. Violence is either wrong or it isn't. And clearly, for Chuck Schumer, the answer depends on who's holding the Molotov cocktail. So let's be clear, Schumer's refusal to denounce violence isn't just a failure of character. It's an endorsement by omission. It's a wink to the mob that as long as they're targeting someone the left has deemed undesirable, whether it's a billionaire, a business, or a free thinker, they're free to burn, bash, and break. And that's the real disaster for America. And speaking of disaster, The View is trying real hard to spin everything that's going good for America in a negative light. But they're face planting, as always.
We are so past wasteful spending, it's not even funny. Now, the question is, will his base be on board with him throwing an extravagant party right now? He did promise to lower the price of groceries. I have not seen an egg for 1 cent since this man got in. Almost, we're too close. Something almost slipped out my face, But, I mean, what the heck?
Whoopi Goldberg once again has traded facts for feelings and served up another hot plate of misinformation, this time about egg prices. In her rambling attempt to dunk on Trump, she claimed grocery prices haven't gone down, mocking the promise to reduce costs and sarcastically dismissing any progress with, I haven't seen that egg go down for 1 cent. Now, let's deal in reality, since The View rarely does. Egg prices have actually plummeted. And we're not talking about vague anecdotes from coastal grocery stores. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, wholesale egg prices have dropped 55% since January 21st and April 5th, 2025. That's a fall from $6.55 to $2.92 in under 3 months. Week by week, the price decline is clear and measurable. $6.85 to $6.08. $4.15 to $3.27, and now to just under $3. That's not a rounding error, that's a total market correction. Now, here's a nuance Whoopi conveniently ignores. Retail prices lag behind wholesale prices typically by 3 to 5 weeks. That's standard industry practice, not political sabotage. The February average retail egg price was $5.90, and by April, those prices had begun to fall by 10 to 20%. So yes, Whoopi, you might still see $4 eggs at your fancy Upper West Side Whole Foods, but across America, everyday families are seeing relief at the checkout line. The decline is real, and it's happening, whether your ideological blinders let you acknowledge it or not. Now, obviously, this is a textbook case of moving the goalposts. When prices spiked under Biden, the excuse was bird flu, supply chain issues, and global markets. But now the prices are dropping rapidly under Trump. Suddenly, none of that matters, and we're supposed to pretend it's still 2022. It's also a classic anecdotal fallacy. She substitutes a personal experience, or worse, an imagined hypothetical, for actual national data. If Whoopi hasn't seen lower prices, that doesn't mean they don't exist. It just means she hasn't bothered to check beyond her preferred bubble. And then there's the bigger play here, distraction. Instead of acknowledging any measurable improvement under Trump's policies, the ladies of The View pivot to performative outrage over wasteful spending and some vague, extravagant party narrative. No context, no details, just vibes. The truth is, they'd rather make snide comments than admit that, yes, inflation is easing and Trump's push for aggressive trade and energy reform is helping stabilize prices across the board. That's the part that really drives these ladies crazy. And here's the reality check. Americans don't care if Whoopi Goldberg feels like nothing's improved. They care about the actual numbers when they go to feed their families. And the numbers are undeniable. If Democrats and their media mouthpieces like Whoopi Goldberg want to stick their fingers in their ears and chant la 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 while prices fall, they're welcome to. But the rest of us will take the receipts, the data, and the cheaper eggs and leave the gaslighting to The View.
What I'm going to say about this, all you countries who watch us, this is not our wish.
No, it's not.
This is not what the American people want. We don't like it. We don't like how it's being, we don't like how this is being done. That's why you will hear us kvetching about this as long as we are able, because no one we're talking to understands what's going on, and therefore, when they say America, they're not talking about us. They are talking about that very narrow band of America that they think they represent, that I think they don't realize they're starting to lose.
Whoopi's meltdown over Trump's tariffs wasn't just incoherent. It was a stream of consciousness tantrum disguised as foreign policy commentary. Somewhere between we don't like it and they're not talking about us, she manages to say absolutely nothing of substance while still embodying everything wrong with elite media commentary. Emotional, fact-free, and completely disconnected from the average American. Now let's start with the rhetorical mess. Whoopi opens with a vague, self-important plea to foreign countries. She says, "This is not our wish." What does that even mean? Is she speaking on behalf of the American people? Because last I checked, the American people voted for a president who campaigned explicitly on using tariffs to level the playing field, protect domestic manufacturing, and decouple from exploitative global trade deals. This isn't some surprise executive overreach. This was a core part of Trump's platform, supported by millions. Her entire rant is built on a classic appeal to emotion. No facts, no economic data, just repeated declarations of how we don't like it. Sorry, but foreign policy isn't built on vibes. You don't get to override a legitimate trade strategy because it gives you a bad feeling. And what she conveniently ignores is that Trump's tariffs are targeted, designed to counter predatory trade practices from countries like China, protect American workers, and reestablish strategic self-sufficiency in industries we shouldn't be outsourcing. And let's address the false dichotomy Whoopi creates between us and them. Whoopi claims Trump's decisions don't represent the real American people, that he's focused on a narrow band of Americans. But that narrow band she's referring to, That's the working class, the very people who've been crushed by globalist trade policies, NAFTA, offshoring, and corporate political alliances that sold out entire regions of our country for cheap overseas labor and higher shareholder profits. Tariffs are about protecting them, not the Hollywood class sipping lattes and hand-wringing on daytime television. And here's the irony she'll never acknowledge. These tariffs aren't about hostility, they're about leverage. The U.S. has been a doormat in global trade for decades, subsidizing other nations' growth while hollowing out its own middle class. Trump's approach is based on reciprocity. You tax our goods, we tax yours. That's not economic warfare, it's common sense, and it's already shown results. The reindustrialization of key sectors, the return of supply chains, and even new union jobs have emerged and are emerging under this framework. But Whoopi and her crew don't care about any of that. They're not worried about the steel worker in Ohio. They're worried about whether a French wine import might cost more. And the most absurd part of her rant is the implication that she speaks for America. No, Whoopi, you don't. The American people voted for this. We voted for tariffs, for fair trade, and for an America First strategy that puts our workers, our industries, and our sovereignty above the approval of global bureaucrats and Davos cocktail crowds. Most Americans want these tariffs. They're tired of being the world's punching bag, subsidizing other nations' growth while our factories closed, our jobs vanished, and our middle class got hollowed out. The strategy is working. Prices are stabilizing, supply chains are returning, and for the first time in decades, America is negotiating from a position of strength, not apology. And what's truly bizarre is watching these coastal elites like Whoopi bend over backwards to appease foreign governments that contribute nothing to our well-being. These are the same nations that would slap tariffs on us without hesitation, block our exports, and gut our industries if given the chance. And yet, they rely entirely on our security. Look at Europe. NATO wouldn't last 5 minutes without U.S. military support, and everyone knows it. But instead of demanding equal footing and tough negotiations, the left seems more concerned with protecting the feelings of countries that treat us like an ATM with tanks. The American people had enough. We're done. We're not here to make France feel better. We're here to protect American jobs, American strength, and American interests. Whoopi can keep crying on cue, but the rest of us are finally getting what we asked for. So if Whoopi wants a crutch about tariffs for the rest of her life, she's free to do that. But she might want to get a grip on the facts before her next televised breakdown. Because outside the studio audience applause, the rest of America isn't buying the hysteria. They're too busy watching their jobs come back.
Trump wrote, "A great time to buy." The other theory is from James Carville, which I think is interesting, that he wants to stoke such instability and chaos to consolidate power for himself, so that people start to really go nuts, which we're starting to.
No, we're not.
Well, people are starting to get mad.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
You want them to get mad.
But how mad will people get, and how broke will people get, and how many jobs will be lost? And then he can say, well, there's too much chaos, and now we're going to have martial law in this country, and he becomes a dictator. I mean, I don't know. That may be out of the bounds.
Anything is possible.
But it's possible.
Yeah.
So somebody watching the news, that's what I see.
Low IQ Joy Behar back at it again, this time claiming that Donald Trump's use of tariffs is some elaborate Trojan horse for martial law. Yes, really. According to Joy, the act of negotiating trade deals and applying economic pressure to foreign adversaries is now a pathway to dictatorship. Forget tanks in the streets. Apparently, the real red flag is a tariff on Chinese steel. You can't make this stuff up. First off, this entire segment is a textbook case of fear-mongering, wild, speculative paranoia with no evidence whatsoever. Behar floats the claim, then immediately hedges by saying that may be out of bounds before Whoopi circles in saying, no, that's possible. That's a classic rhetorical trap called argument from ignorance. If there's no proof against something, then maybe it's true. That's how conspiracy theories work. It's not journalism, it's not commentary, it's unhinged coffee table hysteria disguised as informed opinion. Now let's get to the actual topic, tariffs. Trump's tariffs are not about consolidating power. They're about rebalancing trade and restoring American industry. When he puts a tariff on imports from China or reworks our deals with Mexico and Canada, he's not flexing authoritarian muscle. He's fulfilling a campaign promise that resonated with millions of voters across the Rust Belt and beyond. The goal isn't chaos, it's order deliver through economic strength. And contrary to Joy's fantasy, these policies have delivered. Under Trump's first term alone, if we just look back at that, manufacturing jobs increased, the economy surged, and median household income reached record highs until COVID hit. And if we're talking about now, they put a pause on all the tariffs when 75 countries said they wanted to come to the table to negotiate. The only country that's currently seeing an increase in tariffs is China, because they want to double down and go hard and flex their muscle. And guess what? Today, they already started buckling. So I think it's undeniable to say that the strategy is working. You just have to let it pan out instead of fear-mongering and letting the panic set in. Now, what Behar is really doing here is performing a lazy, slippery slope fallacy. Tariffs lead to inflation, inflation leads to unrest, unrest leads to dictatorship. By that logic, every president who's ever imposed tariffs, from Abraham Lincoln to FDR, the beloved FDR of the left, right, was secretly plotting martial law. FDR, by the way, who served multiple terms, way more than 2. So, makes you think, huh? This isn't analysis. It's a fever dream for a crowd that still hasn't recovered from 2016. Also, worth noting, if tariffs were inherently anti-democratic, someone should tell the Biden administration they continued many of Trump's tariffs on China while quietly admitting they serve a strategic economic purpose. And then there's a laughable part of all of this. The idea that Trump is somehow orchestrating economic hardship on purpose so people will get mad and accept authoritarianism. Here's the reality. Americans are already mad, but not at Trump. They're mad at soaring inflation, which, by the way, went down. It's down. Energy prices and crime in Democrat-run cities. Trust me, I know that one personally. They're mad that under Biden, real wage stagnated while the cost of living exploded. They're mad that globalist trade deals gutted their towns, their jobs, and their futures. Trump's tariffs are a response to that anger, not the cause. And let's take a moment to address the hypocrisy. The same women who applauded lockdowns, vaccine mandates, business closures, and censorship are now warning about authoritarianism because Trump might raise the price of imported solar panels. Give us a break. If Trump were really on a power trip, he'd be mandating speech codes and spying on parents at school board meetings. Oh, wait, that's what the Biden administration did. Huh, funny how that works. So here's what's really going on. Joy Behar and her ilk are terrified that Trump's strategy is working, that tariffs are popular with most Americans, that Americans like the idea of fighting back against economic leeches like China. And because they can't win the argument on policy, they resort to fear. It's always the same script. Trump's a dictator. Democracy's on the line. The sky is falling. Blah, 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 blah. But the more they scream, the more obvious it becomes. This isn't about saving the country. It's about clinging to their narrative and to power. And the American people are tuning all that out. We're done with that.
I got to tell you, I think what's fascinating to me is that the corruption is just completely out in the open at this point, you know, because these kinds of actions where Trump tweeted out before this little pause, he said, this is a great time to buy. And that's really a whistle to those billionaires that can, or people that have money that can buy low and then the stock market prices go up. That's generally called insider trading, and that would ordinarily trigger an investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission. We know now that that's not probably going to happen because all of these government agencies have been, you know, destroyed and dismantled. But someone with knowledge of an economic policy change that would cause the markets to shoot back up right before posting about how great a time it is to buy right before the policy change happened would certainly be guilty of insider trading in my
Well, let's see if somebody brings it to a court and says, hey, what about that?
Well, it looks like Sunny Hostin has officially entered the conspiracy theory sweepstakes of the week, and her entry is one for the books. Trump tweeting, "It's a great time to buy," is now insider trading. That's right. Offering a public opinion on market conditions in broad daylight on one of the most watched platforms in the world is now being treated like it's a backroom tip whispered in a cigar lounge. And this is coming just one day after her co-host Joy Behar claimed the same tweet was a secret signal to unleash martial law. These people can't even keep their delusions straight. It's insane. Now let's start with the basics. Insider trading involves the use of non-public material information to make a profit in the stock market. Trump's tweet, it was public, broadcast to the entire planet. There was no privileged access, no secret email chain, no confidential memo. He posted a market sentiment, a completely legal and extremely common move for presidents, pundits, and financial advisors alike. If we followed Sonny's logic, every time a market analyst, say Jim Cramer, appears on CNBC and says, "I'm bullish," or "the market is going down," they're committing a federal crime. This is a textbook category error. Sunny conflates public communication with private exploitation. She also conveniently ignores the fact that politicians on both sides routinely make market-affecting statements. Remember when Joe Biden said the banking system was safe and secure during the regional bank panic? Or when Obama called the bottom of the housing crisis in 2009? Were those insider trading alerts too? Of course not, because words spoken in public aren't secret information. That's why the First Amendment exists. Now let's address the bigger irony here. The Views panel, who spent 4 years calling every Trump press conference dangerous misinformation, are now arguing that telling the public to buy low is criminal. What exactly was Trump supposed to say? "It's a terrible time to invest, folks. Panic now." Come on. The man was doing what leaders are supposed to do during market turbulence: project confidence, encourage stability, and remind people that downturns often lead to opportunities. That's not manipulation. That's basic economics. And here's the kicker. If anyone's guilty of manipulating markets, it's the very politicians and bureaucrats Sunny's crew usually worships. You want to talk about suspicious timing? Let's talk about Nancy Pelosi's perfectly timed trades. Let's talk about Dianne Feinstein or Richard Burr during COVID. Those involved real, documented cases of lawmakers dumping or buying stock after classified briefings, not tweets. But you'll never hear outrage about that on The View. Why? Because it's not about corruption, it's about who they can accuse of it. Sunny also throws out the claim that the SEC has been dismantled. That's just factually false. The SEC is fully operational under the current Trump administration and hasn't been gutted or sidelined in any way. In fact, if there were a shred of legitimacy to her accusation, the agency could and would investigate, but they haven't. Why? Because there's no case. What Sunny's doing isn't legal analysis, it's projection dressed up as outrage. This is what happens when people confuse political opposition with criminal behavior and hope that repeating baseless claims loud enough will make them true. It won't. And let's not ignore what this really is: another lazy attempt to criminalize Trump's existence. Yesterday, Joy said it was martial law. Today, Sunny is saying it's insider trading. Tomorrow, it'll be telepathic voter suppression. These people need Trump to be a villain so badly, they're willing to fabricate legal theories out of thin air and hurl them at the wall to see what sticks. It's not journalism. It's not even serious commentary. It's unhinged political fan fiction written live on air. So no, Sunny, Trump didn't break the law. He didn't rig the stock market, and tweeting a bullish statement doesn't make you Gordon Gekko. But thanks for reminding everyone just how deranged the left has become about one man and how far they'll go to twist reality into a prosecutable offense. What does this say about our political culture when the loudest voices on television no longer argue ideas but invent crimes out of thin air just to demonize their opponents? When every tweet becomes a threat, every policy a conspiracy, and every economic win a warning sign of authoritarianism. At some point, you have to ask yourself, who's really undermining democracy here? The man reshaping trade deals in public view, or the media figures spinning hysteria into gospel while pretending to be the voice of reason? If you've ever felt gaslit by headlines, talked down to for asking questions, or pressured to parrot whatever today's correct opinion is, maybe it's time to reconsider who's really feeding you propaganda. Because when narratives become more important than truth and outrage replaces logic, the real danger isn't who's in power, it's who's controlling the story. You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Have a terrific day. Peace.